A small diner on the outskirts of town, rain tapping softly against the windows. A woman surrounded by a group of drunk men, glasses shattering, chairs crashing to the floor. From a corner table, an ordinary man stands up. That's enough. In seconds, he takes down the entire group, then gently drapes his jacket over her shoulders. Trembling, she asks, "Why would you help a stranger?" He simply replies, "Because someone once helped me." 3 days later, the sound of a limo engine rumbles outside his door. The woman steps out of the car, no longer in torn clothes but in a powerful business suit. "Mr. Rowan, we need to talk." Jack Rowan was 38 years old, but some days he felt twice that age. He stood in the kitchen of Murphy's diner, flipping burgers and plating eggs like he'd done it his whole life. But those who looked closely could see the discipline in his movements, the precision, the kind you don't learn from a cookbook. He was a former Marine, honorably discharged, though honorable didn't pay the bills or explain the scars on his knuckles. Now he was just a single dad trying to make ends meet. His daughter Lila was 8 years old, bright eyes, wild curls, and a smile that could light up the darkest day. She was his entire world. Every late shift, every double weekend, every burnt finger and aching back, all for her. "Dad, can we get ice cream after school tomorrow?" she'd ask that morning, tugging on his shirt. "We'll see, sweetheart. Depends on tips tonight." She'd hugged him tight. "You're the best dad ever." That's all he needed to hear. Tonight was a quiet Tuesday. The diner was nearly empty. Rain drummed against the roof, the kind of night where people stayed home, but not everyone. Around 8 p.m., a woman walked in. She was in her early 30s, wearing a simple coat and jeans. Nothing flashy, but there was something about her, the way she carried herself. Tired, yes, but strong. She sat alone in the corner booth, ordered coffee and a sandwich, and stared out the window like she was running from something. Jack noticed her from the kitchen. He always noticed people who looked lost. Then they arrived. 4 men, loud, drunk, expensive suits that didn't match their behavior. They spotted her immediately. "Hey, sweetheart, you look lonely." She ignored them. "Don't be rude. We're just being friendly." One of them slid into her booth, uninvited. "Please leave me alone," she said, her voice firm but calm. "Come on, don't be like that." Jack wiped his hands on his apron. His jaw tightened. Murphy, the owner, shook his head. "Jack, don't." But Jack was already walking out from behind the counter. "Gentlemen, she asked you to leave." The biggest one turned. "Who the hell are you? The waiter?" "Someone who's asking nicely." "Well, maybe we don't respond to nice." The man shoved Jack's shoulder. "Big mistake." Jack didn't even blink. In one smooth motion, he twisted the man's arm behind his back and slammed him face first onto the table. The other 3 lunged. It was over in seconds. One hit the jukebox. Another tripped over a chair. The last one stumbled out the door, holding his bleeding nose. The diner went silent. Jack straightened his apron, walked over to the woman, and gently placed his jacket over her shoulders. She was shaking. Why would you help a stranger?" He looked at her with tired, kind eyes. "Because someone once helped me." Before she could say anything else, he turned and walked back to the kitchen. Murphy was furious. "Jack, those guys are lawyers from the city. You just made a big problem." Jack shrugged. "Then maybe the city needs better lawyers." The woman sat there for a long time, staring at the jacket. Embroidered on the pocket was a small letter. "LR." She traced it with her finger. Then she stood, left cash on the table, and walked out into the rain. But she took the jacket with her. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when fate knocks back at his door. The next morning, Jack woke up to his phone buzzing. It was Murphy. "Jack, we need to talk. Come in early." His stomach dropped. He knew that tone. Lila was still asleep, curled up with her stuffed rabbit. He kissed her forehead and left a note on the kitchen table. "Gone to work early. Cereal in the cabinet. Love you, kiddo." When he arrived at the diner, Murphy was waiting outside, arms crossed, face serious. "Jack, I'm sorry, but I have to let you go." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. "What? Those guys you threw out last night? They came back with threats, said they'd shut me down, health inspections, legal trouble, all kinds of hell. Jack's jaw tightened. So you're firing me for doing the right thing? Murphy looked away. I've got a family too, Jack. I can't afford a lawsuit. Those guys are lawyers from the city, Murphy said. Rich, connected. They can destroy me. Jack stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. I understand. Murphy handed him an envelope. 2 weeks severance. It's all I can do. Jack took it without a word. As he walked away, he muttered under his breath, then maybe the city needs better lawyers. When he got home, Lila was sitting at the table, eating cereal. Daddy, you're home early, he forced a smile. Yeah, sweetheart. Change of plans. She tilted her head. Are you okay? I'm fine, just thinking. That afternoon, he started packing his work things, his apron, his knives. The photo of Lila he kept in his locker. She appeared in the doorway, watching him with those big, worried eyes. Daddy, why are you packing? He knelt down to her level. Sometimes being right costs a little rent, kiddo. But we'll be okay. Did you lose your job? He nodded. She hugged him tight. It's not fair. No, but life isn't always fair. What matters is we stick together. Meanwhile, across town, Elena Voss sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor. She hadn't slept all night. The jacket was draped over her chair. She kept staring at the embroidered letters. LR, her assistant knocked. Ms. Voss, your 9 a.m. is here. Cancel it, she said, and get me everything you can find on the man who owns this jacket. Ma'am, just do it. 2 hours later, a file landed on her desk. Jack Rowan, age 38. Former Marine Corps, discharged 6 years ago. She flipped through the pages. Disciplinary action. Refused to cover up evidence of misconduct by a superior officer. Ended his military career. No pension, no benefits. Her breath caught. Current employment, Murphy's Diner. Single father. Daughter, Lila Rose Rowan, age 8. LR, she whispered. Lila Rose. He hadn't just saved her. He'd given her his daughter's jacket. She kept reading. Reason for discharge. Subject demonstrated integrity inconsistent with chain of command expectations. She laughed bitterly. Integrity inconsistent. That's a new way to say he was too honest. Then she saw the note at the bottom. Terminated from Murphy's Diner, October 28th, following altercation with clientele. Her hands clenched into fists. They fired him for saving me. She picked up the phone. Get me the names of those 4 men from the diner and find out which law firm they work for. Her assistant hesitated. Ms. Voss, are you sure? Now. That evening, Jack sat on the couch with Lila, watching cartoons. Bills were spread across the coffee table. Rent, utilities, groceries. The numbers didn't add up. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He sighed and answered. Hello? Mr. Rowan? A woman's voice. Professional. Familiar. Who is this? Someone who owes you a thank you. He sat up straighter. Look, I don't know who you are, but you saved me 3 nights ago at Murphy's Diner. He went quiet. I need to see you, she continued. There's something you need to know. I don't need anything. I did what anyone should have done. You lost your job because of me. He froze. How do you know that? Because I made it my business to know. Please, let me make this right. There's nothing to make right. I'm fine. Mr. Rowan, you're not fine. You have a daughter, bills, and no income. His voice hardened. Don't talk about my daughter. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., I'll come to you. I don't want... You don't have to want it, but you're going to hear me out, because you didn't just save me that night. What are you talking about? She paused. Her voice softened. You saved someone else too. Then she hung up. Jack stared at the phone, his heart pounding. Lila looked up at him. Who was that, Daddy? I don't know, sweetheart. But deep down, he had a feeling his life was about to change. 3 days passed. Jack spent them sending out resumes, calling old contacts, checking his bank account, and watching the numbers shrink. Lila didn't ask too many questions, but he could see the worry in her eyes. On the third morning, he was making breakfast when she ran to the window. "Daddy, Daddy, there's a big black car outside." He looked up from the stove. "What?" "A really, really fancy car, like in the movies." He walked to the window and his breath caught. A black limousine sat at the curb. Sleek, expensive, completely out of place on their quiet street. The driver stepped out, opened the rear door, and she emerged, the woman from the diner. But she looked completely different. Gone were the jeans and simple coat. Now she wore a tailored charcoal suit, heels, hair pulled back elegantly. She moved with confidence, with power. This wasn't a woman running from something. This was a woman who owned the room. Lila gasped. "Daddy, there's a princess outside." Jack's heart was racing. "Stay here, sweetheart." He opened the front door before she could knock. They stood there, facing each other. Up close, he could see the exhaustion still lingering in her eyes. But there was something else now. Determination. "Mr. Rowan, you didn't have to come all the way here." "Yes, I did." He stepped aside. "Come in." She walked into the small living room. Her eyes swept over the space. The worn couch, the toys scattered on the floor, the stack of bills on the coffee table. She saw everything. Lila peeked out from behind the kitchen door, curious. The woman smiled at her, a genuine warm smile. "You must be Lila." The little girl's eyes went wide. "How do you know my name?" Jack stepped forward. "Lila, go to your room for a few minutes, okay?" "But Daddy—" "Please, kiddo." She pouted but obeyed, glancing back over her shoulder as she went. Once they were alone, the woman turned to Jack. "You saved me, that night at the diner, and I didn't even thank you properly." "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, placed it on the table. "What's that?" "A job offer, head chef position, at my company's executive restaurant. Triple what you were making. Full benefits, housing stipend." Jack stared at the envelope like it might explode. "I don't understand." "You lost your job because of me. I'm making it right." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do." "No, you don't." His voice was firm. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted something in return." She studied him, this man who had nothing, refusing what most people would beg for. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why won't you let me help you?" "Because I don't want to be someone's charity case. I've been taking care of myself and my daughter just fine." "Have you?" She gestured to the bills on the table. "How long will your savings last? 2 months? 3? His jaw clenched. "That's none of your business." "You're right, it's not." She took a breath. "But there's something else you need to know." "I don't need to know anything. I just need you to leave." "Mr. Rowan, Jack." Her voice cracked slightly. "Please, just listen." Something in her tone made him stop. She sat down on the couch slowly, like her legs might give out. That night, at the diner, those men, they weren't just harassing me. He waited. "I'm Elena Voss. I run Voss Capital, a multi-billion-dollar investment firm." His eyes widened slightly. He'd heard the name. "I've been investigating corruption in my own company. Embezzlement, fraud, dangerous people who don't want to be exposed. And those men? They were sent to intimidate me, to scare me into silence. It was supposed to look random, like drunk idiots, but it wasn't random at all." Jack felt cold. "You're saying they were there to hurt you? You're—" "Worse than hurt," she said quietly. "They were sent to make me disappear." He sat down slowly across from her. "If you hadn't stepped in—" She looked down at her hands. "I don't know what would have happened, but it wouldn't have ended with me walking out of that diner." The weight of her words settled between them. "I owe you my life," she said. "But that's not the only reason I'm here." She looked up at him. Her eyes were glistening. "There's something else, something I haven't told anyone yet." Jack felt his pulse quicken. She reached into her bag again. pulled out a small photograph, handed it to him. It was a sonogram. He stared at it, not understanding. Then it clicked. "You're pregnant," she finished. 10 weeks. The world seemed to stop. She continued, her voice trembling now. "That night, when those men grabbed me, one of them shoved me against the wall. Hard. I thought." Her hand moved to her stomach. "The next morning I went to the doctor, terrified, certain I'd lost the baby." Jack couldn't breathe, but the heartbeat was there, strong, healthy, like nothing had happened. A tear rolled down her cheek. "You didn't just save me that night, Jack. You saved my child." The room went completely silent. Jack sat frozen, staring at the sonogram in his hand. This tiny, grainy image. A life that almost wasn't. "I didn't know," he whispered. "How could you?" She wiped her eyes. "But now you do. And now you understand why I can't just walk away. Why I have to do something. Why I have to try to give back even a fraction of what you gave me." He looked up at her. This powerful woman, this CEO, sitting in his worn-out living room with tears on her face. "Your daughter's initials," she said softly. "L.R. Lila Rose. You gave me her jacket that night." He nodded slowly. "You gave me the most precious thing you own. To keep a stranger warm. It was just a jacket." "No." She shook her head. "It was everything." The silence stretched between them. Finally, Jack spoke. "What's the baby's name?" "Do you know yet?" She smiled through her tears. "Not yet, but I'm hoping for a boy." "He's lucky," Jack said quietly, "to have a mom who fights for what's right. He's lucky to be alive. Because of you." Jack looked down at the sonogram again. At this tiny miracle he'd helped protect without even knowing. And for the first time in days, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe accepting help wasn't weakness. Maybe sometimes grace flowed in circles. "Okay," he said finally. She looked up. "Okay? I'll look at the job offer. No promises, but I'll look." Her face lit up. "Thank you. But not for me. For her." He glanced toward Lila's room. "She deserves better than watching her dad fall apart. She deserves a father who teaches her what integrity looks like, and you've already done that." Jack stood up, extended his hand. Elena took it. "Thank you, Jack, for everything. Thank you for knocking on my door." As she walked back to the limo, Lila appeared beside Jack. "Is she really a princess?" He smiled. "No, kiddo. She's something better." "What's that?" "A mom. About to be one, anyway." Lila thought about that. "Are you going to help her?" Jack looked down at his daughter, at her hopeful, trusting face. "Yes, sweetheart, I think I am." 2 weeks later, everything changed. A news article appeared online. "Unknown veteran saves CEO from targeted attack." The story spread like wildfire. Jack's photo was everywhere. Elena had released a statement praising his courage and revealing the truth about that night. The 4 men from the diner. Their names were published too. They weren't random drunks. They were lawyers at Mitchell & Stone, one of the city's most prestigious firms, and they'd been hired to intimidate Elena Voss. Within 48 hours, the firm launched an internal investigation. Within a week, all 4 were suspended. Within 2 weeks, they were fired, disbarred, facing criminal charges for conspiracy and assault. The headlines rolled in. "Lawyers lose everything after attacking pregnant CEO. Former Marine exposes corporate conspiracy. The right thing costs everything until it doesn't." Jack didn't celebrate, but he felt something. Not satisfaction, just balance, Murphy called him. Murphy, apologetic, embarrassed. "Jack, I'm sorry, I was wrong. If you want your job back, I appreciate that, Murphy. But I've got something else lined up." "That CEO lady?" "Yeah, that CEO lady." Murphy chuckled. "You always did have a way of landing on your feet. More like falling and someone catching me this time." Jack's new job was everything Elena promised. Head chef at Voss Capital's executive restaurant. The pay was incredible. The benefits even better. But the best part? Elena visited often. She'd come down from her office, hand resting on her growing belly, and sit at the corner table, just like that night at the diner. "Jack, the salmon is perfect," she'd say. "It's just food." "It's never just food." One afternoon, 3 months later, she brought someone with her, a baby boy, wide-eyed, curious. "Jack, meet Alexander." He wiped his hands on his apron and looked at the tiny child. "He's beautiful. He's here because of you." Jack smiled. "He's here because you're strong." Lila came running from the back office where she'd been doing homework. "A baby," Elena laughed. "Would you like to hold him?" Lila's eyes went huge. "Really?" Jack nodded. Gently. She sat down carefully, and Elena placed Alexander in her arms. The little boy looked up at Lila and smiled. Lila beamed. "Daddy, look, he likes me." Jack and Elena stood side by side, watching the children. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me a chance. Thank you for not giving up on me. You saved my life. It was the least I could do." "We saved each other," Jack said. "That's how it works." She looked at him. "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" They stood in comfortable silence. Two people, two children. One moment of kindness that changed everything. 1 year later, Jack stood on a small stage in a community center across town. The room was filled with veterans, homeless, struggling, lost. Elena stood beside him, microphone in hand. "Today we're launching the Rowan Initiative, a program that provides free meals, job training, and housing assistance to veterans in need." Applause filled the room. She turned to Jack. "None of this would exist without one man's courage. Jack Rowan didn't just save me. He reminded me what true leadership looks like." More applause. Jack stepped forward, uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I'm just a guy who did what felt right. But here's what I learned. Kindness isn't a one-time thing. It's a circle." He looked out at the crowd. "Someone helped me once when I needed it most, so I helped someone else, and now she's helping hundreds more. That's how it's supposed to work." He paused. "Don't wait for permission to do good. Don't wait for applause. Just do it. Because you never know whose life you're going to change." The room erupted in applause. After the ceremony, Jack and Elena stood outside. Lila was chasing Alexander around the parking lot. The boy was toddling now, laughing as she played with him. "He's getting big," Jack said. "Too big, too fast." Elena smiled. "But that's life, isn't it? Blink and everything changes." "Yeah," she turned to him. "Jack, I wanted to ask you something." "Shoot. Would you be Alexander's godfather?" He froze. "What?" "You saved his life before he was even born. You've been part of our story since the beginning. It feels right." Jack felt his throat tighten. "Elena, You don't have to answer now." "Yes." She blinked. "Yes?" "Yes. I'd be honored." She hugged him. "Thank you." They pulled apart, both smiling. "You once said you didn't need thanks," Elena said. "I still think you deserve more than silence." Jack laughed. "Then let's call it even. I saved your night. You saved my life back." "Deal." They shook hands. Then they turned to watch the children play. Lila lifted Alexander into the air, spinning him around. He shrieked with joy. Jack's voice softened. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "A year ago, I thought my life was over. Lost my job. Broke. Alone. And now? Now I realize I was exactly where I needed to be, in that diner. On that night, at that exact moment." Elena nodded. "Fate works in strange ways. Or maybe kindness does." As the sun set behind them, Jack thought about everything that had happened. One small choice, one moment of courage, one act of decency in a world that desperately needed it, and it had changed everything. Sometimes the smallest table in the diner can change the biggest story in your life. You just have to be brave enough to stand up and kind enough to stay. The camera pulls back slowly. Two children laughing, two adults watching. One shared story of second chances. Fade to black. Subscribe if you believe kindness always comes full circle. Because it does. Every single time.